Hi, good to see you again. Welcome to Block 5, Addition and Subtraction of Fractions, your very first lesson of Block 5. I'll share my screen. So in today's lesson, you're going to learn how to represent fractions as diagrams and also take diagrams and interpret their representative fractions or their equivalent fractions. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video with those you think can benefit, and then click on the notification bell so that when new videos are released, you'll be notified. Before we start, I would like you to pause the video and answer these retrieval practice questions in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered the questions, here are the answers. For the first one, you were simply asked to write the fractions as decimals. So if you knew that 1/10 is 0.1, then 3/10 will be 0.3. If you knew that a quarter is 0.25, 3/4 would be 3 times 0.25, which is 0.75. And if you knew that 1/8 is 0.125, then 3/8 will be 3 lots of 0.125, which is 0.375. Next, you're asked to state whether the statement is true or false, that 2/5 of the cubes are red. Now, remember, when we have fractions, fractions can be read as, for example, 2/7 is 2 out of every 7. So if you say 2/5, you're saying that 2 out of every 5 cubes are red, but that's not true. We have 7 cubes altogether, and 2 out of those 7 are red. Let's do some new learning. If I ask you to shade in a quarter of the rectangle, how many different ways can this be done? Have a think. Well, we could have the rectangle in this form. That could be also be a quarter. That part shaded is also a quarter, and the last part is also a quarter. We could also have the rectangle split into this number of equal parts, and also that one, and also that one. They all represent a quarter, and they are actually equal in area. You may be wondering, is that true? Of course, we'll explore it in our subsequent lessons. How else could we represent fractions? We could represent, for example, 3/5 as a circle. So we split this circle into 5 equal parts and shade 3/5, or 3 out of those 5 parts. We could also have represent fractions as groups. So you could see here that we have 5 groups. Okay, each group contains 4 circles. So we have that row, that row, that row, that row. So the yellow represents 3/5. We could also represent fractions on number lines. In this case, we have 10 equal parts, but we're required to represent 3/5. One way to think about this is if we were to put a bar under the number line and then split that bar into 5 equal parts corresponding with the number line bars that match it, and then we decide to shade 3 out of those 5 parts, we would see that 3/5 is that position on the number line. If we want to shade 3/5 of these squares, you can see that we have groups of 5. So remember, 3/5 means 3 out of every 5. So if we decide to shade 3 out of every 5, we would have this. Now, you may be wondering that we have 20 squares of which 12 are shaded. Well, something you should know is that 12 over 20 is actually an equivalent fraction of 3/5. If you don't know what that word means, those words mean equivalent fractions, don't worry. We're going to come across it and we'll study it in detail in subsequent lessons. It's now time for you to practice what you've learned. Pause the video and answer questions 1 and 2 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 1 and 2, here are the answers. So for question 1, you were asked, which diagram represents 1/3? You're simply required to tick the box. You can see here that we have 3 parts, of which one part is shaded, so that's 1/3. You can see here that we have 3 columns. One of those columns is shaded, so that represents 1/3. Here you can see that you're required to write the fractions shown in the representation. You can see that here 1 out of 5 is shaded, 1 out of 4, 2 out of 5, and then here 3 out of 4. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 parts, 3 parts is indicated there out of the 4 parts. Pause the video and answer questions 3 and 4 in 2 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered the questions, here are the answers. So here you're required to draw an arrow for each of the fractions to its place on the number line. You can see that this number line, we have 10 equal parts. Here represents 3/10. You can see we have 3 out of 10. Here it's a half. How do we know that it's a half? Although we have 5 parts out of 10, you can see that 5/10 is an equivalent fraction. I'm using that word again. So equivalent fraction means it's the same, the fractions are the same, but expressed or scaled to a different quantity. So if we divide 5 by 5, we'll get 1. And if we divide 10 by 5 again, we'll get 2. Here you can see that it's 8/10. If we divide 8 by 2, we'll get 4. And if we divide 10 by 2, we'll get 5. So this represents 4/5. Here you can see that we have 5. We're required to shade the grid to match the given fractions. You can see that we have 12 squares. And then to represent 5/12, we need to shade 5 squares. Here we are required to represent 3/4. We have 4 columns. To shade 3/4, we just need to shade 3 columns. Here we have 3 rows. To shade 1/3, we just need to shade 1 row. Here we have 12 squares. To shade 1/6, we need to shade 2 squares. How do we know? 1/6 means to shade one out of every 6. Now, if we want to shade 1 out of every 6, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So for every 6, we should shade 1. We have another 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. For every 6, we should shade 1. That's why we should shade 2 here. Now, another way of thinking about it is 2/12 is an equivalent fraction of 1/6. So we're trying to prove that this actually represents 1/6. So this means 2 are shaded out of 12. That's the fraction there. But a common number that we can use to divide the numerator is 2. So if we divide 2 by 2, that will be 1. And if we divide 12 by 2, that will be 6. Pause the video and answer question 5 in 2 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 5, here are the answers. So here you're required to represent 3/5 on each diagram. 3/5 means 3 out of every 5. So here we have 5 equal parts. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we need to shade 3. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 rows. So to represent 3/5, we just need to shade or circle the 3 rows out of the 5. Here we have 5 equal parts, a bit like having pizza sliced into 5 equal parts. To represent 3/5, we just need to shade 3 equal parts. Okay, let's do some new learning. Sometimes you would notice that when you split shapes into equal parts, except you use imaginary lines, you may think that they do not represent equal parts of the shape. If you look at this, you may be thinking that part shaded, which is 1/4 of the shape, does not represent equal parts of the shape. But if we put these imaginary lines, we can see that they all represent right angle triangles and are equal. So that shaded part represents 1/4 of the shape. Now, you can see that if we use that method, this represents 2/8. Now, you can simplify 2/8 to 1/4. To simplify, you divide the numerator by 2 and the denominator by 2. What about this shape? What fraction of the diagram is shaded? Well, thinking about it, we can draw imaginary lines so that we can split the shape into those equal parts. And you will have this. Now you can see that 4 parts out of 9 equal squares are shaded. So we say 4/9 are shaded. What about this one? This young man thinks that 1/3 of the shape is shaded because 1 part out of 3 is shaded. Have a think. Do you agree? Of course not. For us to agree, all parts have to be equal, but we can see that the parts are not equal. In fact, just comparing A and C, you can see that C is bigger than A. We can only begin to represent fractions as parts of shapes when the parts are equal. It's now time for you to pause the video and answer question 6 in 2 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 6, here are the answers. So here you can see the fractions you're asked to match the numerical expressions to their fraction representation. Well, looking at this, you can see, let's do this one first. You can see that this is a half, but here a half is also shaded. So these two could make a whole, which means 1/3, 1 out of the 3 is shaded. Here, let's look at this one here. You can see that 0.4 is 4/10, which means 4 out of every 10. And you can see that if you look at just this part, we have 10 little rectangles, of which 4 are shaded. And also these 10 parts here, 4 are also shaded. So this represents 4/10. Another way of thinking about it is if you put them together, it means 8/20ths are shaded. Now, if you simplify this, dividing by 2, you would see that is 4/10. Let's look at this one. This says 3 divided by 10, which is 3/10, or 3 out of every 10. And you can see that 3 is shaded out of the 10. Here is 0.375. Did you remember our very first example, our very first question, or one of the questions in our retrieval practice? 0.375 is 3/8. So 3 out of every 8. Now, looking at this cube, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, and we have 1, 2, and obviously on the other side, that will be shaded. So that represents 3/8. Of course, if you think about it, this could be you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and we have 4 at the bottom as well. So that's 8 altogether. And then out of that 8, so you can see that it represents that fraction. Then for this one, we've already done this one. For this one, you can see that this is 4/7. So 4 times 1/7 is 4/7. And you can see that 4 out of 7 equal parts are represented. Okay, let's move on. Here for question 7, you were asked, you're required to pause the video and answer questions 7 and 8 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 7 and 8, here are the answers. Tom and Aisha were asked to show 3/5 on a rectangle. Tom is the only one correct because Aisha has not split the rectangle into equal parts. Here you're asked to shade half of each shape. You can see that half of the shape is that portion or the portion below. That one is that portion half the circle, and that one is that portion half the it's not exactly a circle, all right, half that shape. Here we're asked what fraction of each shape is shaded. You're going to have to split these parts into these equal squares. And if you do that, you would see that we would form something like this. And you will have to do the same for that one. And that one. So you can see this is split into 4 parts. And then here you have to do. So if you keep doing that, what you will notice is that you will split the shape and you will get these answers. So this one is 1 out of 14th. Why? Because we have to split the shape into equal parts for us to represent our fraction. If we do that, we would have split these into 14 equal parts, of which one part is shaded. And then this one will be 16 out of 49. And that brings us to the end of our lesson. Well done for sticking around and for taking your learning seriously. Until next time, take really good care of yourself and bye-bye.